Welcome to the Video Insiders Podcast. I'm Carlos Pacheco.
And I'm Tom Martin.
And we are two annoyed and grizzly YouTube veterans that have been managing YouTube channels and being behind the scenes for many years. How many views have you generated, Tom?
She's definitely in the billions. Few golden play buttons to my name, and I stopped counting the silver ones a few years ago, so humble brag. That's just a brag. There's no humility about that whatsoever.
One of my biggest regrets for a couple of jobs I've had is not leaving with my own, with the trophies.
Yeah, should have definitely bagged a couple of those for this office. But we'll have to work on getting our own ones, Carlos. You have to put our money where our mouth is.
I actually, just a little side note, I actually investigated. You are allowed to order extra trophies.
You are, but I've heard that they're not cheap. So
no, they're not cheap, definitely. But if you have if you have a channel that with 1 million subscribers, you can afford to buy a couple $100 trophy.
True.
Tom, what's new? What's going on?
Well, I finally launched my course, my keyword research course that we'd spoken about on a few different episodes. So glad to say that I launched that successfully, and we hit our target, and really just overwhelmed by the response and the caliber of people that joined up. Really happy with that. A few teething problems, which I won't spend too much time going into, but overall, really great. And, there's a lot more coming down the pipe in that kind of area of my business. And you guys will be some of the first people to hear about it. And yourself, good
That's
sir.
awesome.
How is the weather in Toronto? I was going to ask you how you were, but I knew the weather talk was coming anyway. So,
well, today, I got nothing to say about in general, but today is very much a London type day in Toronto. But I would say things are good. The Raptors are playing what could be their championship game tonight as we record. I don't know. By the time this goes live, it'll be what will happen, but my fingers are crossed. I mean, by the way, the Raptors are our NBA team, basketball.
Yeah, I know enough about sports to know that. That's fine.
I'm not exactly a big sports fan, but the city is kind of gone insane because of it. So obviously, it's on everybody's mind and everybody's talking about it. But yeah, other than that, work's going busy, and life's flying by, and just all the good things, and we're just focusing too much on the drama of people doing stuff online.
Yeah, the most important thing in the world, of course, is videos on the internet, and tongue firmly in cheek there, of course. So there's lots and lots of stuff going on in the YouTube realm, online video realm, in the news. So before we dive into our kind of meat and potatoes topic, which is pretty newsy, we just want to cover off a few little kind of news stories and developments that have been kicking around in the last week or so since we last had an episode. So do you want to kick us off, Carlos?
Yeah, I mean, okay, we're doing, first off, a little bit of almost like a laundry list of things that I've sort of been paying attention to online. First off is an apology from myself regarding the pronunciation of Andrew Khan, who I mismangled in the episode.
I think you've just invented a new word there. Just for the way that you treated Andrew, it's worth inventing a new word. It was so disgraceful.
Yeah. And I was like, I felt horrible when I do that. And, that's one of my typical foot and mouth situations that I tend to always end up with. But Andrew, again, his name is Andrew Khan. He works with TubeBuddy. He does amazing videos. He does stuff that I am not able to do.
He's certainly not mismangling any of his videos. I don't think we can't move on. You've mentioned it. Andrew, doing great stuff for our amazing sponsors, TubeBuddy. So we'd like to say a huge thank you to this episode's sponsor, TubeBuddy. It is the world's premier tool for efficiently running your YouTube channels, and you can get an exclusive multi-channel license by visiting videoinsiders.fm/TubeBuddy. Thanks again, TubeBuddy.
Thank you, Andrew Khan and the team at TubeBuddy. So yeah, a couple of things that I wanted to sort of like mention. The Internet Creators Guild. If you don't know what that is a guild that was formed going on 3 years ago by Hank Green, back when he was still the sole owner of VidCon, and it's a great little community. It has a Slack channel. It's got a website, and it's supposed to be there to help creators and educate them and all that sort of stuff. And I've been a founding member. I paid my dues every year, and I got my notification that my dues were up like in a month, and I realized, wait a minute, I haven't heard from anybody in that guild for like months, if not years. And the Slack channel's been dead for months. I look at the social accounts that have been basically, abandoned, some of them since 2017. And I'm like, okay, what's happening here? So I decided to tweet out and call out Hank and team and just give us an update. I mean, it essentially feels like ever since VidCon was purchased by Viacom, that little community that had so much potential has basically been abandoned.
Yeah, because when it first launched, it really kind of built itself as being almost like the union for creators. And I wasn't really a creator, so I never joined personally, but I was very much in favor of the idea. I remember talking about it to my audience at the time and being very much, a proponent of it. So did you manage to get a response from anyone behind the scenes?
No, actually, it's only been a day and a half since I did, and I posted it even on, the tweet I did as well. I did it in the message board, and I specifically tagged Hank. But obviously, one of those things is that, that's the thing, though. Nobody's there anymore, so nobody's paying attention. I did get a couple of like creators in the Slack acknowledge it and sort of give me like the sort of like, I endorse this message type of situation. But other than that, it's been like crickets. So it's sad because it had so much potential, and, but I totally understand. I mean, we all have busy lives and we want to do awesome things, and sometimes things fall through. So my only sort of request here is just to have some sort of clarity here, because, I'm not a creator, but I felt, because I was part of this ecosystem and all, I felt, not responsible, but I felt like a duty to sort of support it. At this point, it just doesn't feel like it's worth supporting because there's just nothing happening. So that was essentially my note there. My second one was just the internet's annual geek out when it comes to Mary Meeker. Mary Meeker is an analyst for big investment firms. I'm not going to specifically say which ones because I don't remember right now and I didn't put notes on it. But every year she does an internet trends report, and everybody in the world of advertising and digital media, they all just fawn over it. They go nuts over it because it's so detailed and there's so much, information about what's happening online. And this year, she just presented it this week at the Recode conference, and it was a gargantuan report, 333 pages. I think it's like 3 times the size of her usual stuff. And I just had one slide that came that was super relevant for us. And this was the online platform time slide. What was really fascinating is that we look at like Facebook, WeChat, Twitter, Snapchat, Pinterest, Twitch, all these sort of like social platforms. Every single one of them except 2 are stagnant, basically just staying flat, no growth in usage. Guess which 2 are growing significantly? Instagram and YouTube, to a point where YouTube, if it keeps going the way it's going right now, will surpass Facebook in internet usage in terms of like 1 times per day around the world, which would be insane. I mean, YouTube is a social platform, so wow, it's just interesting to see. And then Instagram's right behind it in terms of growth. I mean, it'll surpass WeChat probably probably this year. We'll see what happens next year. But anyways, I wanted to sort of like bring that one up, which was really interesting.
Yeah, and we can see. We'll link to this slide in the show notes. But at the bottom of the list is Twitch, going from 1% of users to 2% of users. Which may sound small, but from a bit of an upstart platform compared to the rest that are really quite mature, I think I'd see that trend going up. I don't think it's going to get anywhere near to, the 25% that we see things like WeChat, WhatsApp, YouTube at. But I think it could easily overtake Snapchat in a year or so, and maybe even start to jump on the heels of Twitter.
I don't know. I'm not convinced Twitch has that much potential. I agree that there's a lot of demand. There's a lot of people on it, but there's just a weird. I love what Twitch has brought to the world, and I love that happens. As somebody who used to game a lot, but it just seems. But the UI has always been such a big issue for me, and I think for the average person who just wants to watch video, it's just not going to be mainstream for, and they've tried to do a bunch of mainstream things over the years, but it just doesn't catch on. And anyways, I'd
love to dive into the report, because I'd love to see this same chart broken down by like average time spent, because I think that Twitch would be way, way up there. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's people that are watching 4 or 5 hours of streams at a time. So interesting to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, YouTube not going anywhere, growing. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of this growth comes from, how do I say it, more developing parts of the world, the kind of South America, South Asia, Eastern Europe, kind of places. So
yeah, those are big markets.
Yeah, and they're growing fast. One extra little news item that I wanted to mention was that yesterday, I think it was, YouTube announced some updates to their subscription and notifications, and they said they're going to try or they have fixed somewhat the reliability of people getting notifications once they ask for them. And really interestingly, they've now added in analytics. You can see how many people have got their notifications turned on and stuff like that. So really interesting things that you can now find in analytics. And if it's lower than you would like, you can, start to run some kind of campaign to get people to hit that notification bell, which should technically now work better than it did last week.
Yeah, it definitely. It was great to have them finally, I mean, how many years in, they're finally explaining why notification sometimes is broken. It has definitely improved, but it's always sort of been a black box in terms of like how people finding out, when videos are going live and stuff.
So that was our kind of quick round robin of some shorter news stories, but we have a big news story, which is going to be our main topic of today. And it's been bubbling away. The theme has been bubbling away, I would say, for at least the last year and a half, if not longer. But it's kind of seemed to have come to a head in the last few weeks. And what we're talking about is YouTube starting to clamp down on a number of things. First of all, we saw it in the kids space, and then kids comments. And now we're seeing a move against what YouTube is talking about, like hate speech, and also what they call borderline content, which they go on to talk about what essentially means kind of conspiracy videos. And so I'm going to try and run some kind of basic timeline, and we're going to talk through kind of each step along the timeline and what's happened, revolving around the story and how this affects you guys out there. So
do it.
On the 5th of June, YouTube put out a blog post which basically said that back in 2017, they started to take more steps to limit the features and the reach of any videos that kind of even spoke about kind of hateful topics or hate speech. And, to go into a bit of detail on what that means, it basically means any kind of video that made it clear that one group of people were inferior to another. So whether that's race, gender, sexuality, class, caste, they reel off a whole list. And it said that in 2017, they really took some measures to kind of throttle those videos. But straight away, that raises flags to me, Carlos. I don't know about you. Why would you throttle the views and kind of halt the reach of something? If you don't agree with it as a platform, why allow it at all? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts is YouTube has always been wishy-washy when it comes to its rules, right? It has a history of just like, oh, you're not supposed to do that, but we're not really paying attention to each and every video. So yeah, maybe we'll catch you one day, maybe we won't. So one of the biggest problems with YouTube is that they cannot curate all the content. It manually approve everything by human beings, and it's just impossible. So when they say throttle, I always sort of like think that's a little bit of not clear. What I believe really happens is they just the algorithm ignores it, and it just doesn't.
So that they say that they limit the reach of.
Yeah. I mean, and then to me, I'm a big believer that free speech doesn't equal free reach. That's something that's been happening more and more on these social platforms as people have learned how to game it to get attention here, right? And the gaming way of getting attention here is by creating drama, going after very intense emotions, and creating controversy. That's something that the platforms, all of them, are essentially struggling with. At this point, I think they have to be really careful not to be outright banning stuff, especially when it's not it's not stuff that's really it's when I say I wanted to say really bad, but that's not the word when I say there's horrible stuff being uploaded online, like on a daily basis, from porn to people doing horrible things. So that we're not going into that level of things, and those things never make it online, thankfully. But
they make it online, they just don't make it to YouTube.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that's what I sort of mean when I say online. I just meant YouTube. But yeah, I think it's sort of like a tough situation to be in. I wouldn't want to be in YouTube shoes right now, because they've sort of put themselves in a corner here by not policing themselves for many years, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, it's starting to cause trouble, so they have to start doing things. And
they've also said that their systems are not perfect. This is always the case whenever there's a big change. It's like, well, there's going to be some collateral damage, but with AI, the systems get smarter and smarter, and we can't catch everything. And to me, equally as worrying as not catching everything is kind of false positives.
Yeah,
I was involved in a bit of a Twitter discussion with a channel that I will admit I'd not heard of before. It was called Mr. Allsop History.
Yeah.
And it's just basically a history teacher here in the UK that teaches the UK history curriculum. Mm-hmm. He's just doing kind of basic lessons. And of course, it will cover stuff like the Nazi Party, because that is a major part of history. And basically his whole channel got demonetized, and he's not preaching hate speech. He's talking about factual things that happened without glamorizing or inciting hatred or anything like that. He's just talking about facts. There's no agenda there. He's talking to teenage kids and teaching them as he would in his class setting. I think he actually got a lot of the stuff overturned. He has, I think, about 15 or 16,000 subscribers, and therefore likely some kind of way to contact YouTube. But I think this is definitely an issue of kind of overreaching these new policies, and also people that don't have a voice, people that don't have more than 10,000 subscribers yet, that can't necessarily get an email to somebody at YouTube to say, look, I've been caught in the crossfire here. And of course, with any new policy, there's going to be some fallout. But I've seen it time and time again, even firsthand at the BBC when I worked there. We had a lot of historical documentary footage. One that springs to mind, we had a really, really, really popular documentary about Hiroshima, which of course is a horrific event. But it was just a documentary, it wasn't a drama. It didn't glamorize anything. It didn't fetishize anything. It was just documenting facts. And all of that stuff got demonetized. It just kind of gets caught up because it's about war. And I think, you can understand it, but it also seems a little bit heavy-handed. And with any new policy change, I think we're going to see a lot of false positives and fallout from this kind of initial, shall we call it, like heavy-handedness.
I think fundamentally it's one of those things that it's an adulting phase.
Yeah.
It's like YouTube, I think it's a theme that we've addressed this year on many episodes, and that YouTube has to clean itself up to survive. The world is becoming much more used to the internet, a lot more users on it, and a lot more people with experience on it. They're starting to see that the content that shouldn't be there, user created, content and platforms that grow from user created content, the risks are now huge, right? And there's not a lot of, platforms out there growing in this way anymore because people are more and more sophisticated. I mean, I'm pretty sure I haven't looked much into TikTok, but I'm pretty sure there's already controversy stuff happening around. There's already a bunch of like really bad content on TikTok. And because TikTok is young, it gets away with it in a way, right? And nobody's really paying attention to it. But because YouTube's become such a mainstream thing that, every media is paying attention to it. And because YouTube takes mind share away from TV, online publications, whatever, then all these medias are like, well, they're going to be much more critical of YouTube, and they're going to be on YouTube's case consistently because of that, because they're regulated. So they want YouTube to be regulated.
Yeah. And it comes back to the theme that we've been bringing up pretty much since we started the podcast, which is YouTube's turn towards more traditional media for their kind of, their ideal uploader is now, a media company and not necessarily Johnny in his bedroom who's talking about politics or whatever it may be. And I think that's only going to continue as they clamp down on different genres. In the last week or so, there's been a massive clampdown in my kind of nerdy part of YouTube, which is like poker channels, people talking about poker vloggers, and one of the biggest poker vloggers had a lot of his videos either taken down or demonetized this week. And again, luckily he's big enough that he can get a seat at the table to find out what's happening. But it's because he was linking, I think, to, poker sites where people can, download poker software and stuff like that. And so I think, they're slowly but surely going kind of genre by genre and picking off anything that is even remotely
controversial,
not family friendly or controversial or could get them in any kind of trouble whatsoever. So I think that's only going to continue and continue and continue. But so they released this blog. I'm not quite sure of the exact timings, but I don't think this kind of developing news story could have come at a worse time when they're talking about their increased policies against hate speech. Because there was a massive news story where a journalist from Vox, which is a well-respected publication, came out publicly and said that he was getting abuse from a political commentator. Is that how you would describe Mr. Crowder? I'm not sure.
From what I know, yes. That's
a political commentator who was saying some pretty wild things about the journalist, specifically in relation to his ethnicity and his sexuality. You can find out more about that by Googling it. We're not going to go into it too much, and we're certainly not going to talk about any politics on this podcast. But what we will say is there was a massive outcry because the videos in question from the political commentator were flagged by many, many users. And then YouTube looked into it, and then they came out with a public reaction. So, Carlos, do you want to talk about that, the decision that they took regarding those videos, and then what the kind of fallout was from that?
Well, the issue at first is that they sort of played neutral and said, like, well, Mr. Crowder's allowed to sort of say what he wants to say, and all that sort of stuff. And then Maza, who's a reporter, obviously, went into the details of YouTube's policies, and it's specified that bullying is not, is not tolerated on the platform. Yet that's exactly what was Crowder was doing, and he was inciting his fans to sort of like go after him, which is the big issue with the whole thing. And at the same time, selling merch that inadvertently was sort of like playing, was also like bullying, but in a very sort of like tongue-in-cheek way. But YouTube sort of like got issues with that. So yeah, that's essentially what caused the big issue.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read out the tweets from Team YouTube. So they said, our team spent the last few days conducting an in-depth review of the videos flagged to us. And while we found language that was clearly hurtful, the videos as posted don't violate our policies. We included more info below to explain the decision. And they go on to say, as an open platform, it's crucial for us to allow everyone from creators to journalists to late night TV hosts to express their opinions within the scope of our policies. Opinions can be deeply offensive, but if they don't violate our policies, they'll remain on our site. So basically they said, yes, this is nasty, but because it doesn't kind of incite people to go and like hate people and violence, basically we're gonna leave it up. And then of course there was a very, very big backlash from the journalist, of course, and then a lot of the LGBT community, all the way to the fact that the San Francisco Pride Committee wanted to basically keep YouTube out of their celebrations because they were not, keeping up their end of the bargain, shall we say, when it comes to being an LGBT positive platform. But then YouTube kind of changed their mind. Carlos, do you want to tell us what kind of happened next?
Well, yeah, I mean, they changed their mind. They used sort of they didn't outright ban Crowder. They decided to basically cancel his monetization, unmonetize him, and then called them out. I think it was also the merch. And they used the merch part of it as to be the sort of the excuse, not necessarily his content. It was more because of the fact that his merch had sort of like hate speech on it, and he was using YouTube to sell the merch. So yeah, that's sort of where they sort of switched gears. They didn't outright ban him, but he's technically not making money, but he's making money. I mean, he's getting views. He's getting people to go to his website.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, like he'll survive this. He hasn't gone full Alex Jones in terms of being completely deplatformed. Yeah, that's where YouTube sort of like switched gears.
Yeah. So just to totally clarify, originally YouTube came out and said he has been demonetized because he's selling these offensive T-shirts. But then they basically said if he removes the links, he can monetize again. But then they came out again and said, we're also going to keep the demonetization off because of the other issues that are kind of surrounding him. So I think bit by bit, they kind of wielded to pressure and decided to, without banning him, basically, bring the ban hammer down on him. And then it came all the way to CEO Susan Wojcicki coming out and offering some kind of apology to the LGBT.
Yeah, same thing. And it was sort of felt like, there was sort of some rumblings of even internal Google employees, YouTube employees really feeling that, YouTube wasn't holding its end of the bargain and wasn't really standing up for them. They've since apologized. Even Sundar Pichai sort of mentioned it earlier this week. By the time this video goes out, this will probably be a little bit of old news, but and hopefully things will be settled down. But I think it's sort of important for us to sort of talk about this because one of the things that I find really disingenuous, and this is something that's been happening since the whole adpocalypse of almost 2 years ago now, is the fact that like a lot of LGBTQ content has been demonetized since the adpocalypse, right? And that's definitely not cool. And especially when you consider, especially when there's like so many brands out there putting the colors on their logos and being supportive. But yet, if I am a YouTuber who's talking about or educating about gay rights or all that sort of stuff, my video has a higher chance to be demonetized or limited into monetization, right? And that's something that I personally have taken offense with. It's sort of like, that makes no sense. That's where things are super murky, and probably one of the reasons why things have blown up in the last month or so.
Yeah, and I think what's really important as well is to say that even though they came out and apologized, they still stand behind their decisions. And I'm not gonna get dragged into the whole free speech or not debate. I don't think this is the right place to get into that kind of conversation. But what I really want to talk about, and what I think is the real important point of today's discussion, is, are YouTube standing by their decision because they believe in free speech, or, as I believe, are they standing behind their decision because they don't want to take ultimate responsibility for policing what goes on their platform? Because as soon as they start to step in on what is really appropriate or not, they then become more liable and responsible for what goes on the platform. Whereas traditionally, they've always said, we're not responsible for what gets put up.
Yep.
We're just a platform.
Yep.
Again, a recurring theme. So I'd like to get your take on that, Carlos. Like, why do you think YouTube stand by that decision, and how long can they use this notion of hands in the air? We're just a platform. We're impartial. We're a third party here.
The whole platform excuse that both YouTube, Facebook, and even Twitter are using is starting to not be relevant anymore, because when you're just platform, you can't be limiting what people do with it, right? You have to sort of like let people use different apps or different programs with it, and as time goes, Facebook's sort of the ultimate example of like, as time goes, they limit more and more and more things, and obviously they got in trouble by letting people get too much access to their data, but that was their decision, right? They left things open, but as time goes, they've closed the platform up to be much more controlled by them, and that's where things get a little bit murky in terms of like, is it just a platform? When I think of a platform, I think of WordPress. WordPress is a platform. WordPress, you can do whatever you want. You pay. Well, you get a free account as well, but you pay WordPress, and you can put whatever content you want. And the only issue with WordPress versus YouTube, Facebook, and other is that you don't get reach. Like, you have to market that platform, you have to do all that work, and that's where these platforms are super beneficial, and why everybody's much more attracted to that. I feel like they're already past the point of no return, of no longer being just a platform. Well, first off, when you create content, which they have been doing, as even the YouTube premium stuff, to me is a signal that you're not just a platform anymore. You're more of a media. And to me, it was sort of like, okay, well, they've given up, the whole platform excuse. In my head, that's what they had thought they had sort of moved on from, but they're still using it, and it's starting to get really, really hard to defend them on that situation at this point. That's where things are with me, and when it comes to that.
So, Carlos, in terms of how we can give actionable advice for anyone affected by this, I think to a certain extent, if you're working with quote unquote controversial content, whether you think it's controversial or not, whether that's LGBT stuff or talking about historical stuff, political stuff, war, guns, alcohol, medicinal cannabis, whatever it is, sexual health, you're ultimately you need to know that you're playing on, you're building your house on somebody else's land, and you have to play by their rules. Even if you're doing something that you think is totally innocent, like the example with the poker vlogger, YouTube have the right to, basically take away their monetization tools at any point. So ultimately you need to be prepared by way of diversifying your income stream, so you're not wholly reliant on YouTube for that AdSense check. Also considering the kind of metadata and language that you're using in your videos. So is there a way that you can talk about the same topic without using kind of incendiary language, or making sure that you're being objective in your presentation of anything that could be deemed as controversial? But for some people, I was working with a channel a couple of weeks ago that was working in a niche, and they were, basically blanket demonetized, and asking me what they could do about it. And really all I could do was shrug my shoulders and say, you can't get around this. The niche that you're in is just not suitable for YouTube. You can change the tags and, but you can't hide what the subject of these videos is about. And, there's not really anything you can do to help yourself apart from maybe look for another platform or think of a way to monetize other than AdSense. And I think that's really the biggest lesson that you can take from this.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that creators get into, and media companies that have built themselves off YouTube get into, is their dependence on the platform, right? And I think this is sort of like another sort of message that we've been harping on is you need to build YouTube to do, you need to build that audience on YouTube, but you need to build an audience off YouTube. At least find other ways to sort of make money. I mean, let's face it, Steven Crowder, he's making money off of YouTube, right? He's built an audience off of YouTube as well. And he's used YouTube very well, but at the same time, he's smart enough to have been, diversified his audience. That's what everybody in this space, there's, not getting into the specifics of the type of content anybody wants to make out there, but like if there is an audience for everything out there, and if you're playing into the world of controversy and content that isn't brand friendly, well, you're going to always have trouble with these platforms, because they are trying to make money with the brands, and that's just the reality of it. And you need to use the audience in different ways to make money from the growth, from the views.
I think one kind of positive to finish on is also, in terms of what you can do that's actionable. If you do see content out there that you think is disagreeable, that shouldn't be on the platform, and that certainly shouldn't be monetized, that you do have the powers to shout out about it. You do have the powers to flag it on the platform. There's, in a click of a button, you can report a video. And, if enough people speak out then against something, then YouTube will listen. They've proved that. They might not have taken the fullest extent that some people might have liked, but they did take some action because there was enough noise made. So if there is something you believe strongly about, speak up about it, definitely.
Yes, even though this is very surface level, stuff, when we want to be the behind the scenes people, this is all stuff that affects us. So it's really important for us to sort of like keep on it and pay attention to it, because some of us have clients and some of us have our own channels that can be affected by it. So it's really important for us to just be aware.
Yeah, so please, talking about speaking out, please let us know what you thought about this week's episode, about the subject. You can tweet us at Video Insiders, or you can email us hello@Video Insiders. We cannot finish without saying a huge thank you to our sponsors, TubeBuddy. And remember, you can get a exclusive discount by visiting videoinsiders.fm/TubeBuddy.
Yes, I want to also constantly acknowledge that TubeBuddy's been really on the ball in terms of updating its apps for the new YouTube Studio. Another side note is that supposedly in the next by the time you listen to this, it'll be too late. But now YouTube's going to start really enforcing studio, which, some of us old school people are sort of like, oh man.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. And another side note, and this one's for our famous editor of this podcast, Joe Pacheco, who's actually my cousin. He got a job at Watch Mojo.
Oh, wow.
He's going to be working on their new division regarding music. I think Watch Mojo is doing a new music project, maybe a new music channel, and all that sort of stuff. When Ash publicly announced it, said that he needed people to help work on it, I made the introduction, and Joe is going to start working at it. So I'm really happy.
Little nepotism.
I mean, hey, you got to. I mean, I didn't have any pull. Ash he's not somebody that you can mess around with, and he did his due diligence to make sure that it was the right candidate. So
Of course he did, because he listened to this podcast, which is expertly edited by Joe. So thank you, Joe. And thank you to all of our listeners. Please make sure you leave us a review and that you are subscribed in the podcast app of your choice. And we will speak to you in a couple of weeks.
Have a good one.
Bye.